Hello and welcome back to Ask an Agile Coach. I'm Andrea Fryrear, CEO and co-founder of AgileSherpas, and I am joined by the lovely and intelligent Cheryl Sutton today, who is going to be sharing some coaching wisdom with us. Thank you, Cheryl, for spending some time with us.
Ooh, thank you so much. As Andrea said, I am Cheryl. I'm a coach and trainer here at Agile Sherpas, and like all of us Sherpas here, I have spent most of my career in marketing. But I got to say, when I got introduced to Agile, there was no turning back, and since then, I've come at it from a lot of different angles, so I can appreciate a lot of the pains and questions that might be getting lobbed at us.
Yeah. So before we dive into the kind of big meaty question of the day today, I have some standard coaching questions that I want to get your thoughts on. So first and foremost, like, why is coaching a thing in the first place? So obviously you focus on helping people through adopting agile ways of working, but coaching might apply to a lot of big change moments. So why do you think that it's important to leverage a coach?
Because you're doing something new. And I think if you think about, other times in your life when maybe you've done new things, you usually have some sort of support, right? Like growing up, you have your parents or some other really important adult figures to help you through, whether that is through teaching you specific things or being there to be that sounding board. Or, if you play a sport, you're probably used to coaching in that sense. You have someone helping you learn things, but also help you apply and then take things to the next level. So to me, coaching is just a natural piece of helping us learn to do new things and kind of take ourselves to the next level, whether that's agile or something else in our lives.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so as you've been doing this for years now, what's your favorite thing about being a coach?
My favorite thing is probably, seeing those light bulbs go off for people. And when I see people start to realize that something's possible that they didn't previously realize was possible. One of the questions I like to ask a lot is what would help look like? And sometimes if people haven't really thought about that, um, they realize like, hey, actually, X, Y, or Z would be helpful. And it's like, okay, so what's stopping you from doing that? And it's like, oh my gosh, like I can get the help I need. I can make this connection. I can have this conversation. So being able to see people, have those realizations is just really fulfilling for me.
Yeah, we get so like stuck in the same way of thinking. We assume we can't do that or assume that's not possible. It's nice to have somebody kind of nudge you in another direction.
Yeah, absolutely. We all need that sometimes.
Totally. And so then what's the hardest thing about coaching for you?
I think for me, a lot of times it's patience because sometimes you're maybe, with someone or with a team and you just want to be like, no, just go do it like this. I promise it'll be better. But they're not there yet. Like if you drop that on them, it wouldn't be the right moment. It wouldn't be well received. They're just not in the place for that. So having the patience to meet people where they are and just be that little half step ahead, that little bit of a nudge, to help them along the way versus nope, you just go do this, I promise it'll be better.
And I think maybe that feeds into one of my other questions about how people can take the best advantage when they have access to a coach, because a lot of us haven't really, as adults at least, worked with a coach. And so we want somebody who's going to tell us the answer, right? Like,
Mhm.
just tell me what to do, right? I'm guilty of this myself when I've worked with coaches of like, you've seen, like, just jump ahead with me and let me skip the
Yeah.
hard work of finding the answer. So whether it's don't do that or some other piece of advice, what would you tell people so they can get the most out of a coaching experience?
I love it when people like have prepared a little bit, like thought about here's where I really want to be. or here are my questions. I mean, just even coming with the questions or the concerns, but just coming with something to kind of put out there, and be ready to kind of talk about. Not that I don't enter, coaching conversations, especially if I've been with a team or an individual kind of observing. I might have some things to bring up. I probably do, but I want to hear what's on their mind so I can really provide the best support for what they need in that moment.
And that doesn't have to be a big lift, right? You're not talking about an hour's worth
No.
of prep for somebody, but just a little bit of jotting down stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so then let's get into one of the real questions that we've heard from folks in the Agile marketing movement who are actually trying to do this stuff day in and day out. So we have an interesting kind of very specific and niche sort of question that we'll start with, and Cheryl and I will kind of talk through it. But then we want to go a little bit broader and see what we can tease out from this scenario that might be applicable to other people in maybe sort of similar or
Mhm.
adjacent situations. So our questioner for this particular conversation works at an online magazine, and they need to go out and find people to pay to have sponsored content put into that magazine. So the person is using Agile, but now they've got this new thing that they want to try out, right? So they need to work on their business development approach. They have a pretty small pool of people to test and learn in because it's a very local publication. So they don't have tens of thousands of people they can work with. So the question is how to get the process of ideation, so getting the brainstorming stuff built into their Agile ways of working, and then also, accessing a pretty small audience as well.
Mhm. Gotcha. I guess one of the things that first comes to mind that I'm curious about is what conversations have they had with their customers that might lend some insights here? Because a lot of times, we make a lot of assumptions, but, an interview or two with a customer sometimes yields some pretty amazing insights that we wouldn't have come up with kind of in our own bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that I'm kind of curious about.
Right. And that can easily be built into a sprint backlog, to reach out and conduct the interviews. And, those are things that become cards and pieces of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wonder too, are there others within the organization that maybe haven't been tapped into that might be able to lend some helpful perspectives here? Because again, sometimes we get into our bubble where we're working with the same people that we always have, but maybe there's, somebody we haven't talked to before that, is somewhere in this pipeline of communication that might be able to lend some new perspective.
Mm-hmm. And so how have you seen teams deal with this integrating new kinds of work, right? So she's asking particularly about brainstorming or ideation. Where does that fall into? I've been talking a lot about sprints as if it has to be a iterative cycle, but there's lots of ways that we can build that creative moment into Agile ways of working.
Yeah, I guess it really, I don't think, like you said, it has to be a sprint or a particular thing, but maybe there's a routine that they can decide as a team to make around this. Maybe there's a cadence specifically for this brainstorming that they feel would be appropriate, whether that's, a monthly routine, bi-weekly, every 6 months, whatever is appropriate. But, making a list of like, okay, who could help with this, and starting to put some feelers out and start to co-create that routine together.
And when you're designing experiments like this with a pretty small data set, right? Like, so let's say we're talking like a couple dozen potential sponsors for this person, as opposed to right? Some big B2C brands might have hundreds of thousands, right, of people in their addressable audience. Any best practices or thoughts there around how experiments might look different when you're working with such a small group?
That's a good question. Yeah, the pool's definitely smaller. So your potential people to reach out to test your first thing is probably a lot smaller too. You can't maybe go out to 20. It's maybe one or two. But I think still applying kind of like, okay, how are we going to step through this in bite-sized chunks? Like, okay, if we want to, try experiment A, we think it's only maybe reasonable to reach out to, one or two people. Well, what are the indicators? What's the success going to look like for that? And then, okay, based on what we hear, do we go to the next one or the next one? So I think you can still do things in the bite-sized chunks. It's just, laying it out for a much smaller group. And maybe, your measures of success look a little bit differently too, because it is so small.
Right. Yeah. And I think what you said there is important about how will we know, right, one way or the other, like if we're on the right track or if we've gone too far afield based on people's reactions or yeah, just what they tell us about it. I think you have the benefit maybe of being a little more qualitative,
Mhm.
and it can be more conversational. Whereas in a big audience, you've really got to think about statistical significance and, what are we gonna, how long are we gonna let this run before we make adjustments too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So any other things you've seen work well, not work well with teams that you've worked with before during this kind of early phase, right, of integrating maybe a new type of work into an agile process?
I think, and this goes for kind of everything we might be experimenting agile wise, keeping the feedback loops open, whether, especially if you're working kind of internally across a group of people to help stand this up. Just keeping really open lines of communication about what's working well with this, what isn't, making sure you're checking in for that kind of feedback because, to your point, it is something new. So, you're going to learn a lot as you go.
Awesome. Well, Cheryl, I really appreciate your time and expertise today. And make sure you subscribe to the AgileSherpas channel for being the first in line to hear the next of our series of Ask an Agile Coach.
Thanks so much. It was great to be with you.